I would often joke with people and friends that were close to me about the fact that, I don't want to have kids, or that, kids are so far in the future, when behind the scenes, my wife and I were trying to have kids and it just wasn't working.
Welcome to the Secret Life Podcast. Tell me your secret. I'll tell you mine. I'm excited to share that I'm speaking at the Sober Voices Flow event on October 2nd. Sober Voices was created because you deserve to be seen, because it shouldn't be this difficult to find people on this journey, and because it's been way too hard in this global pandemic, and we all deserve more connection, liberation, and joy this fall. It's an incredible 4-day event starting on September 30th with 76 speakers covering over 20 categories. Topics including mindfulness, mental health, love, friendship, intimacy, long-time sobriety, 12-step recovery, sober fun, nutrition, parenting, and more. Use my code SECRETLIFE20 to get 20% off. You can find the link in the episode notes. When I first started my recovery 11 years ago, I struggled through the textbook-like material on this subject. I wanted to make the addiction and the recovery from it accessible and relatable to more people by telling it in an entertaining way. If I can help just one person find a solution, or at least realize they're not broken or alone, then writing this has been worth it. You can pick up the book Secret Life of a Hollywood Sex and Love Addict exclusively at Amazon, or signed copy at secretlifenovel.com. And the best way to support our podcast is to subscribe and share. If you haven't left a review or rating on Apple Podcasts yet, please do. It'll help more people find our show. And if you want to be a guest, shoot me a note at secretlifepodcast@icloud.com. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to Secret Life Podcast. I'm Brianne Davis-Gant. Today I'm pulling back the curtains of all kinds of human secrets. We'll hear about what people are hiding from themselves and others. You know, those deep, dark secrets we probably want to go to our grave with, or those lighter, funnier secrets that are just plain embarrassing. Really, the how, what, when, where, and why of it all. Today, my guest is Shane. Now, Shane, I have a question for you. Dun, dun, dun. What is your secret?
It's the moment of truth, right?
The moment of truth is here.
And I know you've been doing such an incredible podcast. I've been listening to people's stories and how honestly they're sharing and how vulnerably they're sharing. And this might seem really anticlimactic for a lot of people, but for me, my secret is that for a number of years, I would often joke with people and friends that were close to me about the fact that, I don't want to have kids, or that, kids are so far in the future, when behind the scenes, my wife and I were trying to have kids and it just wasn't working.
See, that to me is one of those secrets that when you hold that stuff to yourself, it puts all this pressure and this on you. Do you feel that even saying that out loud right now?
Yeah, I mean, the conversation is that it seems to be like it's this secret that exists about protection rather than about necessarily feeling like it's a lie to people. Right. It's more about this kind of putting up these walls or these barriers around you to almost protect yourself from the reality of the conversation.
Oh, believe me. And my story is not even compared to yours, and we'll get into yours, but I had a miscarriage while I was working on a show and away from home, and it was devastating. So I know how difficult when you are trying to have a child and something goes wrong or it's not working out. It's devastating. And then people ask you, what happened?
Yeah, I think that's the big conversation, right? Is that it comes up quite regularly. And my wife and I, we've been married for 12 years. Mm-hmm. And so it's a conversation that comes up all the time. And we're kind of in that stage of life where all of our friends are having families. And, it's the conversation. It's every time you have that conversation, it kind of is almost like this little tiny dagger that kind of keeps driving in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, it's like a dagger in your heart. It's like, ugh. It just takes a little. So when did you guys start trying? Can you take us back to the beginning? Did you want kids?
Yeah, I think we always, to some extent, have wanted to have kids. But obviously, we started a career and kind of focused very heavily on our career really early on in our marriage. We kind of, in some ways, we flipped what a lot of people do. A lot of people tend to, they get married, they buy the house, they have the kids, and then they kind of start to ask, well, what do I want to do with my life? Whereas we kind of didn't really do all of that. We kind of just jumped straight into career. We studied. I started a business, and then we started getting to that point where we're like, maybe we want to travel, and so we started traveling, and then we kind of were at the point where like, we actually really would love to start a family. And we kind of had this assumption that when you're ready to start a family, that's just when it happens.
Yes, it's just easy. It just falls into your lap.
Exactly. So, I mean, the conversation started a few years ago, and we were like, okay, well, let's just kind of wait and see what happens. And we're kind of expecting. And then, for probably about 12 months, we kind of just were having the conversation and just kind of expecting something to happen. And then we were like, okay, no, we need to get a lot more serious about this. Let's really start trying. And then for a couple of years now, we've been trying. And again, we describe it as riding the roller coaster, because again, like you find yourself getting excited and then all of a sudden let down, and then excited and then let down. And we try and tell each other every month, we're like, okay, don't jump on the roller coaster.
Yeah.
But how do you tell yourself not to get excited about the potential of something?
It's impossible. It's literally impossible. You're trying to play like a Jedi mind trick on yourself because you get so attached to this hope or this possibility.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask you a really hard question. And if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to. But have you guys gotten pregnant?
No, we haven't. It's still a conversation that we're having with people. Yeah.
You're going to doctors or looking into
Yeah, which is always the interesting part of our story, is that we've gone through to the doctors and we've had conversations, and in theory everything should be fine. And this is where the kind of the tension that we try to reconcile within ourselves is that like our understanding is that everything should just happen naturally and everything should just happen. And then yet we find ourselves at the end of the conversation, at the end of every month, having a conversation with each other going, it didn't happen again. And so this is this hard thing to reconcile, is that like, okay, where is the disconnect between what we want to happen and the reality of what's happening?
Wow. Have you guys tried IVF or anything?
No, and I think for many people, and even people listening to the podcast, there'll be people whose story is, much longer than ours and much more detailed than ours. And, we've only been trying for, I guess, a couple of years now, but I guess we're still in that stage where we're kind of seeing where things go in a natural path. And I guess we'll find out. I guess we'll start having more serious conversations about that soon. But yeah, right now we're still just we're not in a rush, but at the same time, it's still a bit of a roller coaster of emotions.
I mean, like I told you, I had one miscarriage and it broke my heart. So I understand every month trying to figure out why it's not happening. And then for me, I don't know about you guys, but I had moments where I was like cursing God.
Yeah.
Like, where you're like, fuck you. Like, you're just like, why do you have to do this? Because it's devastating. I mean, can you tell me how the conversations go with your wife, especially as a woman?
Yeah, I mean, she's remarkable in these conversations, and it's funny that you say like we get into those places where we kind of curse God, or we kind of hold a set of beliefs about the world, whether it's a belief about God or whether it's a belief about the universe, whatever it is, we tend to hold it, and then when things don't align with what we think or what we believe, what we want to happen, we do a couple of things. We either, and I think you would see this in the conversations you have, we treat it as this secret to be kept because it kind of doesn't bring any alignment to our life. And so what we do is we put it away, we put a wall around it, and we pretend it doesn't exist. And that's kind of where these secrets kind of brew. Or the other alternative is that we assume that it's some kind of puzzle or riddle that we need to solve. And so what we end up doing is try to figure it out. Yeah. And so what we end up doing is, rather than being silent on it, we end up seeking all these external sources to try and bring validation to it. And so we go, okay, well, we'll figure out who runs the universe and we'll blame them for something that's, that's taking place in my life. And it's challenging. I think part of this is those beliefs that we hold about, what we expect or what we want to happen. And so we had to kind of, in our conversations, really go back to the core of what we believe about things and ask ourselves, what are we holding to be true? And does that truth serve us right now?
Wow. I mean, you are much more evolved than me.
I wouldn't say that. I think it's just ongoing conversations, right?
Oh, it completely. And also like turning it over. I love that, the core, because we would just turn it over and be like, everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
Everything works itself out in the way it's supposed to work out. But I have to say, when you get down to these, as humans, we're there to procreate, right? So it's like, it kind of hits though at the basic core of what our bodies are supposed to do.
Yeah. And again, like part of this comes down to that, what do I believe to be true? And if my belief at its very core is that I'm supposed to start a family and I'm supposed to have X number of children, or that I'm even supposed to be in a relationship, some people might even be listening who aren't even at that place where they're in a relationship yet. And if their core belief is that this is what I'm supposed to be or what I should be, then anything that doesn't align with that, they're going to feel like they've fallen short of this standard that they've set for themselves. And I think often a lot of the conversations I have with people is that belief needs to be held really tightly and really loosely at the same time, which might seem like a complete paradox in one sense, because belief needs to be held tight enough that you can hold on to something and stand on something in moments where you need that or you experience that fragility. But it also needs to be loose enough in the sense that when a belief doesn't serve you anymore, or when a belief may not necessarily be helpful or true, we need to be able to let it go. And that's a really difficult challenge to know, when do I need to hold tighter and when do I need to just let something go, right?
Yeah, because you want someone to be like, okay, now do that, let go a little, or hold on to that hope and that belief. But it's like, when do you know that's the correct thing to do? What do you get down on your knees? Do you turn it over? What do you do in those moments when the month comes and it didn't happen again?
Yeah,
what do you do? I'm asking you, like, what do you do?
I don't know. I think every month we experience something different. I think we have a different response. And so some months we just reconcile ourselves to the fact that we go, you know what, for a long time we've been trying to start a family, and we got to the point where we go, okay, what does it look like to reconcile this idea that it may never happen? And like, that's a confronting conversation to have. And I go, so what does that mean? What would I tell myself? And I know you love Brene Brown's work, and she often talks about the stories that we tell ourselves. And so we often kind of keep ripping back the layers of the onion almost, in a sense, to ask ourselves, what are the stories we're telling ourselves? And so when we go, okay, it didn't happen again. Okay, so what does that mean? What is the story we're telling ourselves about that? And if we were to really go deep, it's like, what's the core belief? And I guess the belief that sits deep down into all of that is that if this doesn't happen, then in some way I'm a
Not
failure
enough.
or we're not enough. And I think that's the most dangerous part to this conversation.
Well, I also believe, and when you just said that, it rang so true. Every time I was willing to just let go and let be, I was talking, it's a roundabout way, but this morning I was talking about how I hate vision boards. People make those vision boards. You could love them. People are listening.
I'm just going to hide my vision board for a moment. Just
put it behind you. Don't let me see it. But we were having this intense conversation, my husband and I, because he believes in vision boards and I do not. Because for me, a vision board represents fantasy. It represents like these things you want. And that's very tricky for me, because it's better for me to like sit in what is and be in gratitude. And I can't do both. And that's what you're talking about, to sit in what is. So this month we didn't get pregnant again. What if we never do? Can I be grateful for how life is now? Will I be okay if we don't have a family?
Yeah.
And that's the question. That's important. And the moment you choose and say, I'm okay just as I am, right where I am, whatever size family I have, whatever size house I have, or career, or whatever.
I love the perspective of that gratitude places over our life, because it grounds us in what we have to be grateful for right now. And I've been reflecting a lot on this kind of idea lately, that we experience life in all kinds of ups and downs and highs and lows, peaks and troughs and seasons. And sometimes they happen like over years, and sometimes they happen over moments, right? You can have this really high moment and this really low moment. And the thing that I've been reflecting a lot lately is it's so important when you experience those really high moments, those moments of elation, that you really dig deep in humility and remember that there are people who are experiencing those kind of trough or those down moments. And then at the same time, when you experience them for yourself, to really dig deep in community and remember that there are other people who can help and that you can reach out to in those moments. And so as we navigate this, again, like the roller coaster of the ups and downs, like we've just got to remember that there are people that are there willing and ready to kind of join us on that journey.
And it's true. And I have to give you props for, reaching out to me and willing to talk about this, because I also, the other question I really wanted to ask you was, as a man, how is it affecting you? We always talk about how it affects a woman. It's her body, she feels the loss because it's attached. How is this for you as a man? Do you feel powerless? Do you feel like you don't have any control?
Yeah, and in some sense that as a husband, I look at the way it affects my wife. Mm-hmm. And obviously it's a very different conversation for a woman that's going through this journey. And so there's this part of me that grieves with her and for the way that she's feeling. And at the same time, also, I reflect internally and go, okay, so what does this mean for me? And some of the stories that I tell myself about masculinity and about, this kind of standard that I set for myself. So again, you go like, okay, am I some kind of a failure? Did I, what's wrong with me? And I think every conversation that has some shame or, attached to it, we often go straight internally and go, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, that's the first thing I think everybody thinks, unless you're like the Dalai Lama and you have it all together. But what's wrong with me? But this question, have you actually mourned? Yet?
Yeah. And in one sense, no. And in the other sense, every month. Do you know what I mean? Like there's the feeling of a loss of what could be every time you take a, pregnancy test and it comes out negative. There's that, you try to, we often say to each other, don't get on board the roller coaster. And what we mean by that is essentially don't start to kind of go 3 or 4 steps ahead of where we are just yet. Because again, you start to go, okay, well, what could it be? Like, what is our life going to look like? What do we do with our career and our jobs? And you start having conversations about the future. And then all of a sudden you snap back to reality in a sense that...
Well, it hits you in the face.
It hits you in the face.
Pick up that little piece of plastic, and if the 2 lines or the X or whatever is not there, your heart goes into your chest again. And what do you do? What do you and your wife do now? Do you just talk about it right after?
Yeah, I think a big piece of this is the conversations and the communication. I think which is in anything is so important to recognize that we can both be telling ourselves stories. And the moment you start to externalize those stories, you start to realize just how fictional they are, or how unreal they are, right? And so we can tell ourselves a story in our head, and we can create this scene and this narrative that's taking place. And I often describe in the metaphor as like we sit in a movie theater and we watch the movie on the screens, and it can feel like we're detached from it, and it can feel not real. And all of a sudden we can go, yeah, well, that's fake, and that's not real. But often in our own head, we jump into the movie and we start playing it out, and all of a sudden we feel like we're part of it and it's real. And I think it's so important to be able to externalize that, have conversation about that, because it makes it disconnects from the reality of it and helps us to see some of the fiction in our own stories.
Yeah, because they have a saying for it in my program, you're addicted to fantasy, negative or positive, and you go in and you play the whole scenario. And have you ever had those moments where you're like, wait, snap back into reality? That's actually not happening.
Yeah.
And it's
absolutely.
It's like a mind trick. But I always like to take these kind of secrets. And I know it's a secret to protect yourself, and which I love that we're talking about it, because I do believe there's moments in life where you don't share something if you're not on the other side of it yet, and it can protect you. But I like to attach them to these 7 deadly sins, not in the religious sense, more in the character defect. So let me name them for you and let me know if any of them ring true for you. Yeah. So we have pride, greed, lust, gluttony, envy, anger, and sloth.
Yeah, wow. Like the thing that stands out to me, like at a personal level that I see a lot of coming through is that sense of pride. And I think pride is that, again, like when we talk about the protection, I think pride is one of those barriers that we put up as a way to protect ourselves. And we don't want to, I guess there's sitting below the surface of that pride is that sense of ego that when it gets bumped or nudged into, it can come out in all kinds of ugly ways for people. And for me, in some sense, pride is just wanting to be protected and wanting to be, I guess, guarded from the reality of some of the situations, or feeling like in some way or to some degree that I've fallen short.
Yeah. I mean, everything you said just rings true. Any more? I mean, we got greed, lust, gluttony, envy, anger, and sloth.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's the root cause of it or core of it, but I would definitely think there's this degree of envy that sits within there as well.
Yeah,
and
I was kind of thinking that, but I didn't want to answer that for you.
And you can
sometimes
see it, right?
I do, but sometimes I don't want to answer it.
And I think envy sits in there. And I think envy, the reality of that becomes more aware when you see other people experiencing what you want. Yeah. And I think right now where we see the reality of that is that, you know, people in our world, in our expanded world, in our sphere of influence, we see them starting families. And, you know, often someone will have a conversation with you, they'll say something like, oh, we accidentally got pregnant. Or like we've accidentally,
Don't you just want to hit them a little bit? Like smack them, like just, or kick them in the knee and like run?
Well, definitely. I mean, if you were operating from that place of deep envy, like the natural response is like, oh, I hate you so much right now. Yeah. And yet every part of you wants to be so happy for them and so grateful that they've got that opportunity. And so again, like you can see where some of these things at the core belief can really affect how we respond and how we engage in those moments.
What about anger?
Yeah, I think anger's definitely there at times. I think where it wouldn't be the thing that I think sits at the forefront of our conversations, because I think we've reconciled to ourselves that this is not some kind of secret to be stored away, nor some kind of problem or puzzle to be figured out. Mm-hmm. And I think with that, it allows us to be able to kind of take each step as it comes. But there's definitely moments. And again, those moments tend to come in waves where it's like, it's frustration and then it gets outworked through anger. And it's anger not necessarily at anyone or anything, but it definitely can be expressed in that way. Yeah, and it can come out in a number of ways. It can come out at, you know, anger at, you know, I don't know, the universe, or this frustration, or, you know, it could be anger at God, and you could be angry at these moments, or it could just be, you know, anger at the situation. Again, like I guess it gets expressed in different ways for different people.
Yeah. So keeping the secret that you and your wife are holding for you two to go through this journey together, who do you think it's benefiting and who do you think it's harming right now?
Well, I mean, it was so interesting to reflect on the conversation about sharing this story with other people. Because I think in many ways we're told there's some things you kind of just don't talk about, right? And, you know, we don't talk about, you know, politics and money and all those kinds of things. But like for some reason, this is also one of those conversations. And fertility, and it's not a conversation that we have. Yeah, and because I think in some ways we should. And I think for some reason we grew up in an environment where, because you didn't have these conversations, we didn't really know how to have them. And so people would ask things through the lens of, you know, either curiosity or, you know, in a really genuine way. And it would feel really harmful or hurtful. And so now what people do is they stop asking questions. And then as a result of that, you don't get to share any of your journey with people. And so people actually see one side of you, but don't see you fully.
Yeah. They don't see like the struggle. They just see, oh, this is what happens. If someone came out and said, hey, I'm really struggling with this, like this is something I really want and I'm struggling and it's not happening, how much more love and, you know, would be available to you than when you were going through it by yourself.
Oh, it's so true. I've reflected on a lot lately. The big thing that I've kind of been digging deep into, and I love exploring like the origins of words, and it's kind of a weird habit and a weird kind of thing that I enjoy doing. It's like, because I love understanding the language and where words come from and how we arrived and what we were arriving at. And, you know, we were in this kind of global pandemic at the moment in Melbourne, where I'm based. We're in this kind of lockdown at the moment.
Oh, we are too in LA.
Yeah. And this is the kind of world we're living in, right? And what we've lost is this sense of contact and the ability to kind of touch and connect with other people. But then really what we kind of want in this place is to be cared for and to care for one another. And so I was exploring some of the origins of these words. And, contact is all about, touch, and connection is all about coming together and binding. But then when I looked at the origins of the word care, it actually comes from a German word. And it was the origin of the word is actually in the word lament or grief. Oh. And I was like, wow, I've never explored that before. And then I had this moment where I was reflecting. I was going, when are the moments in your life when you felt the most cared for? And there's a good chance the answer to that question is you've probably felt the most cared for when somebody's seen you in a moment of grief or in a moment of lament.
And when you were in pain and suffering.
And not just when you were in pain or suffering, but someone saw you. And I'm talking like really saw you. Yeah. Right? And there was this moment where we were experiencing this roller coaster of emotions, and my wife reached out to a number of her friends, and she calls it her girl gang, and they talk about and have these conversations about the reality of where we're at. And recently, someone else we knew announced this pregnancy, and actually there's quite a few people, they all announced their pregnancy. And it was obviously, again, like another one of those little daggers in the heart. And then the next day, we get this delivery at our door, and it's this box of donuts. And it was from one of these close friends of ours. And they were just like, we just want to know that we see you. And we know that's really hard. And it was that moment. And I was like, that's care. Like when you were grieving, when you were hurting and somebody sees you in that moment, that's what it means to really, truly feel cared for, I think.
Oh my God, I'm like about to cry. First of all, I love donuts. And second of all, that is the sweetest thing, because like, especially in, I don't know if the friends were the ones that announced or in that group, it's like to actually see the people that are struggling in this moment of joy and to reach out and with that unconditional compassion. It's that empathy. And I'm just getting so emotional, but that's so sweet.
Because those are the moments, right? And I think like if you were to reflect, or even if people who are listening were to reflect on those moments when they felt deeply cared for, it was because they were in some degree, they were hurting, right? And probably like us, we put up the protective barriers and we go, okay, I don't want you to see me hurting. And I think this is part of the conversation around like why we don't talk about this openly. It's like, because if I tell you I'm trying for a family and I'm potentially really excited about it, and then it doesn't happen, then I'm going to be hurting. And I don't want you to see me hurting. But really what I've realized is that the best gift you can give yourself is that courage to be seen in that grief. And actually the best gift we can give to other people is to be able to really see them when they're experiencing that. It makes such a difference for people.
It really does. I mean, every single person I know that was struggling with this, it felt so much better to reach out and to be a part and just say, I'm here. I know you're in pain. You'll get through this. You'll get to the other side. But then you have moments too when for instance, I can't say who they are, but if someone has another miscarriage and another person says, please don't tell me about them anymore. And it's like, how can you do that at such an incompassionate time, I guess? So it's also picking the right people who you want to share that with and get the caring from and all that.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important. Like the conversation around community is that, I mean, you can only be cared for to the degree in which you allow people to see you. And there's a difference between going out there and, every month putting on Instagram or posting, hey, it didn't happen again. Like it's this, do you know what I mean? But yet, and it's kind of like that seems like a bit of an unusual thing to do. But I think there's definitely a space where your community is, whatever that community is for you, whether it's a close friend, whether it's a group of friends. But there are people that are close to you. It's kind of like someone going for a job and going, I don't really care about the job. And then when they didn't get the job, you go, hey, did you get the job? They're like, oh, no, I didn't get it. Like, oh, it's okay. You didn't want it anyway. But yet really on the inside, what you really wanted was the job and you were so excited about the potential of it, but you've played it down because you didn't really want it. And people can only care for us to the degree in which we allow them to see us. And so it's that sense of going, hey, I'm actually really excited about the job, so that when I don't get it, my friends know, hey, they were really looking forward to that. I didn't get it. How can I be there to support them? And I reckon this is where the conversation piece around community makes it so important, is that we've got to have these conversations and we've got to be able to talk to one another and allow them to see this.
Especially as a man, because I have to say as women, we do share a little bit more, but I feel like now it's opening up for men to really be authentic in their struggles, be authentic in their fears and their sadness. And are you feeling that's opening up?
I mean, yeah, it is and it isn't at the same time, because I know there are some conversations that we can have really openly and honestly with good friends of mine, but then I still know that I can recognize that there's sometimes these barriers that sit between us, and there's two conversations taking place, and in every room there's two conversations. There's a conversation we're having out loud, and then there's a conversation we're having in our head. And exactly. And part of this is, how do I make sure that what's going on in my head is given space to in between the conversation that we're having out loud. And I think as guys, we're still learning, we're still getting better at it.
Well, I have one more question for you before you go. How do you plan on moving forward?
Wow. I definitely think the biggest lesson that we've taken away from this experience is that when we allow others to see us in those moments where we're at the bottom of the roller coaster, not just kind of the top of the roller coaster. I think when we allow people to see us in those moments, then we can feel that we're cared for. And so I guess we're just continuing our conversation and continuing our decision to let other people in on our journey. Because when we let them in, then when we can see they can see us, then we can feel cared for. It's kind of not enough for us to go, nobody cares about me, nobody's interested in me, when we haven't yet had the courage to allow them to see the parts where we need the most care.
To show them those shadow parts.
Exactly. And I love the way you've described that.
Yeah, here's all the ugly, here's all the like disappointment, and I'm still okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this secret and this journey. And I'm going to be thinking of you and your wife.
Thank you. I love what you're doing. And what you're doing is you're bringing a spotlight to the shadows, and you're bringing conversation to important conversations. And so thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. And if you want to be on the show, please email me at secretlifepodcast@icloud.com. Until next time. Thanks again for listening to the show. Please subscribe, rate, share, or send me a note at secretlifepodcast.com. And if you'd like to check out my book, head over to secretlifenovel.com or Amazon to pick up a copy for yourself or someone you love. Thanks again. See you soon.